Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, a nationally ranked community-focused bank with over 30 locations throughout Virginia, Northeast Tennessee, and North Carolina. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. What's going on, Hokie Nation? Welcome into episode 301 of the Tech Sideline podcast. A little bit of a shorter approach today as Chris Coleman is on the set and we dive into the latest news with Virginia Tech football recruiting. That's coming up and more here on episode 301 of the Tech Sideline podcast, and it starts right now. So glad to be back here on the microphone in this awesome set here at the Corporate Research Center in Blacksburg. We record on Thursday, July 20th, 2023 from our high-tech studio at the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center here in Blacksburg, Virginia. We welcome you in, whether you're listening to us on your favorite podcast service or if you're watching us on YouTube. If you are on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe while you're over there, and also turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future TSL content. Tech Sideline is, of course, presented by First Bank and Trust Company, and this episode is also brought to you by Coldwell banker Townside REALTORS, trusted real estate services for the Roanoke and New River Valleys. Are you in the market to purchase or sell a residential property? Are you looking for land or investment property here in Southwest Virginia? Well, we have you covered with 3 offices in the area. Visit cbtownside.com to learn more. All right, well, simple introductions today. Just me and Chris talking a little bit of college football. Chris Coleman, of course, the lead analyst and columnist here at TSL. Founder and general manager, Will Stewart, producing behind the scenes today. Chris, I mean, it just feels like this is an exciting vibe, an exciting buzz around Virginia Tech football recruiting right now. You have 2 very recent commitments. The most recent, Eric Mensah, a 6'3", 290-pound edge rusher. I have LB. Of course, I say meaning pounds, and of course, I say linebacker.
Neither is going to turn out to be right, though.
Okay, defensive tackle
all the way. You know, he's a guy who was listed anywhere between like 250 and 290, and I want to say maybe when he probably got entered into the 247 database, he was probably listed at 250 or 255, so they just said edge rusher.
Right.
But the problem with that is like 247 and some of these sites, they never project growth for players. Like, if this guy's 16 years old, he's not going to stay 250, 255. Well,
and he's already huge.
Now he's 285 or 290. His position hasn't gotten updated on 247. He's a defensive tackle all the way for Virginia Tech.
I figured, and I read that in your article, just wanted to give it what 247 had offered. He committed on July 17th, a 3-star. And then, of course, Keylen Adams, the big one, arguably the biggest recruit Virginia Tech's pulled in quite some time, a 6'1", 170-pound, and I'm not going to say linebacker this time, wide receiver. He committed on the 13th, about 4 days before Mensah. But first and foremost, I just kind of want to start surface level here. Is this the best recruiting buzz that we've seen around Virginia Tech football in maybe the last 15 years, especially since the Fuente days? No doubt about it.
I think when Devin Hunter committed, was big. All right, so Keylen Adams is top 150-ish or thereabouts. Devin Hunter was top 50. Like, he was 4.5-star, I will say, somewhere between a 4-star and a 5-star. Like, everybody wanted Devin Hunter, and Virginia Tech won that battle. And remember, that was Fuente's first full recruiting class. So you're coming off a 10-win season in Fuente's first year, and then he signs Tech's highest-rated recruit since, goodness knows when. So I would say that's I would say the day Devin Hunter committed was probably there was a lot of recruiting hype, and Tech signed a lot of 4-star recruits early in Fuente's era. So I mean, it's not like there hasn't been hype. I remember there were like 4 or 5 guys from North Carolina who took their official visits to Virginia Tech the day Tech beat UNC 59-7 in Lane Stadium. So like, a bunch of dudes like Trey Turner and Dax Holyfield and Alan Tisdale, guys from the state of North Carolina, were at that game,
right,
and watched Tech hammer UNC. And there's a lot of hype around that weekend and things like that. But certainly the most exciting, time for recruiting since early in the Fuente era.
Well, let's go ahead and dive in and talk about Eric Mensah here. He is the most recent commit, like we said. We're going to call it a defensive tackle. One more time, 6'3", 290 pounds, out of Mountain View High School in Stafford, Virginia. We just talked about that. The Fredericksburg area, not necessarily a hotbed, so to speak, for top college football talent. A 3-star. He is the 37th ranked edge rusher. Now, again, if he's not an edge rusher, this is kind of worthless, right? According to 247 Sports, the 11th ranked edge rusher in the state of Virginia.
Oh, no, that'd be the 11th ranked player in the state of Virginia.
Okay, 11th ranked player in the state of Virginia. Nationally, 818, 51st best edge rusher. I mean, this is just the metrics here. And then 19th in Virginia, according to the 247 composite, which kind of pulls in all of the other recruiting sites as well. So what do you expect out of him? You expect him to make the move to DT, and how can he add to this room where you've already gotten a couple of guys at his position to commit?
He plays defensive tackle in college, or excuse me, in high school. Like, it is not a debate on what, I want to make this very clear. It's not a debate on what position he's going to play in college. He is a defensive tackle all the way. If anybody tells you he's an edge rusher, it's not true. It's not going to happen. All right. He's a solid 3-star recruit. He's exactly the defensive tackle I wanted to close out this defensive tackle class. He's a guy, he's got a college-ready lower body. Like, his lower body is like Derek Nottie. When Derek Nottie came out of high school, when he ended up going to Florida State and is currently in the NFL out of the Virginia Beach area. His upper body has some catching up to do to his lower body, but this is a guy who doesn't look like he misses Big Squat Fridays very often. I think he has the physical ability to contribute early. He'll have, like most high school defensive linemen, he's going to have to learn to play lower and things like that, but that's, that can be coached out of him. That's not a big deal. But yeah, this is a guy who was a major target for Virginia Tech, and I like this defensive tackle class. You've got Emmett Laws, who I think is just such a great fit for the Tech scheme. And then you've got Handchuck up from, I believe, Ohio. He's got the body and everything like that, but he's tougher to evaluate because he kind of played like defensive end in a three-man line. And he only had 4 games of film this past year because he had a torn ACL, I believe. So he's tougher to evaluate, but I think the physical ability is there. I don't look at this group and say, man, what a bunch of projects. Maybe one of these guys will be ready by his 3rd year in the program. No, I mean, I think Laws will be ready to go pretty early in his career. And I think the same thing for Mensah.
Well, we've kind of talked about that, right, with this position group in particular. They're so senior heavy right now that it almost like takes that gap. It almost takes like a year or 2 off, and defensive tackle had to be a priority. That was something that you've said all the way through. So to get these 3 guys, 2 of them being a little bit on the higher end, in particular in Laws and Mensah, what can do you see them being in a starting lineup their freshman year?
That would be tough. I mean, I think these days with the transfer portal, Virginia Tech, I'm sure, will still target a transfer portal defensive tackle this offseason, at least one. How many they target really is going to be determined by the 3 redshirt freshmen in the program right now, how they develop over the course of this season. You're going to lose Narell Pollard. You're going to lose Mario Kendricks. Fuga is technically a senior, but he's eligible to come back. He's eligible to come back and use his COVID year.
Did he only appear in 4 games last year?
Oh no, he played in.
He played more, but he was banged up a handful of times last year. He missed the Middle Tennessee game. He definitely missed that one. I want to say he missed Georgia Tech. He missed a handful of games.
Did he really?
Last
Okay,
year.
okay. But he's got another year left. I think he'll use that year personally, but we don't know it for a fact, and that will also determine how many transfer portal guys Tech decides to take. It's really, really hard to start as a true freshman anywhere, especially a very physical position like defensive tackle. Derek Hopkins did it back in the day, I believe, and he was a great player, but you just don't see it happen very often. I would not bet on either one of those guys starting as a true freshman. I think if one of them does, it's because Virginia Tech, they don't. If Tech doesn't do a good job in the transfer portal, then maybe one of these guys can step in. But so much is dependent on the development of the guys currently in the program. So, Lamar Law, Gunnar Givens, Malachi Madison, those three guys. How much progress they make between now and the end of this season will play a big role in all of that.
Gunnar being a top 10 last year in the state of Virginia in last year's class. Well, let's go ahead and flip the script here and talk about Keylen Adams. Again, he committed back on the 13th. Really good article just went out yesterday by Jason Stam on TechSide.com. Check it out. He talked about how he went on this cruise, and that's really when his stepfather said, hey, put football aside and not think about it. And then by the end of it, he kind of had his decision that he wanted to be a part of the Virginia Tech family. He talked about, which I found very, very interesting, that he does plan on making a splash right off the bat. Fontel Mines and Tyler Bowen have explained to him how they want to use him, even with the addition of Chaz Wiggins in the same recruiting class as well, another top guy in the state of Virginia. They said they want to get Adams the ball early, and they want him to be their go-to guy. That is him being quoted in that article. So what are your thoughts on him making a splash immediately?
I think they want peak Keylen Adams to be their go-to guy. True freshman Keylen Adams, it's unlikely. He's a highly touted recruit. He's a definite four-star recruit in my book. He's got the athleticism, the explosiveness, the leaping ability, change of direction. Very, very, very good prospect. But you've got Jalen Lane eligible to return next year. Two of your three transfer receivers are eligible to return next year. Dwayne Lofton's eligible to return next year. Gosnell is eligible to return next year. Chance Fitzgerald's a four-star type wide receiver recruit. Virginia Tech has done a good job bringing a lot of good receivers into the program over the last,
which they missed last year.
Absolutely. Do I think he'll have a chance to play as a true freshman? Absolutely. He's got to get some route running stuff cleaned up, and he even said that himself in the article. And sometimes when he catches the ball, he keeps it to the outside rather than tucking it in and things like that. So sometimes he doesn't necessarily catch it cleanly, although he does have good natural hands. So he's got some things he's got to work on. But as far as like being the go-to guy as a true freshman, wide receiver, how often does that happen?
True.
It doesn't happen.
It happens, but not
very often.
Not at our school. Sense.
When it does happen, like, all right, Isaiah Ford and Cam Phillips did it, but there were literally no upperclassmen.
Right.
They were the only two wide receivers that played that year. Really.
Right.
So they had to be, because the talent was so bad. If Keylen Adams had come in last year, then yeah, maybe him and Caleb Smith would have been the go-to guys. But Tech's gonna have more options now, which is what you want. So you can let a guy like Adams develop at his own rate. Whether he starts as a true freshman or not, or whether he catches 40 passes or 12 passes or whatever, or even whether he redshirts, who knows? Either way, he's a very good long-term prospect for Tech, and it represents a big recruiting win for Virginia Tech and for Fontel Mines specifically.
Well, how do you think they complement each other when you talk about him and Wiggins? Wiggins, 2 inches taller, could be looked at more as an outside type of guy, but really 2 inches definitely helps, but it seems like both of them can be outside type receivers.
Yeah, I think Adams is probably the more versatile of the two, who could line up in the slot or on the outside. I think Wiggins he's listed at 6'3". When you look at him, he's got good length. Like, his arms look long. He really looks more like the frame of like a 6'4" guy or something like that. So I would envision, like, let's just say, for example, 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, whatever, you've got Chance Fitzgerald on the outside. You've got Chance Wiggins in there on the outside. And then by default, you'd have Keylen Adams in the slot, because the other two guys are legit 6'3", 6'4" type receivers. So I think there's a little more versatility there with Adams, and he could also potentially factor in the return game. He's that type of athlete who has a good short area burst and very good change of direction ability. So now, of course, being like a punt returner, the most important thing is is, you've got to be a good center fielder. You've got to be able to judge fly balls, so to speak, and get under it and make the catch and make the right decisions. That's the most important thing. But as far as from a pure athleticism standpoint, he's that type who could do that.
Now, as somebody that, grew up around basketball more so than football, now big football fan as well, but there's a lot of times where guys will commit and not end up at those schools.
Right.
Whether they go to the G League, whatever. That happens a lot in football too, obviously, especially in today's day and age. It almost feels like there's that like false sense of hope. Like I always look at it as like, I'm not trusting that the guy's coming until even past National Signing Day and I see him in a Virginia Tech jersey on game day, right?
Yeah.
You got 16 guys in this class. How many do you expect to truly be here? And I want to ask this too. They're recruiting each other on Twitter, everything. Is there that additional sense of commitment? Like, hey, I'm not just committed to Virginia Tech. I'm also committed to Davy Belfer, who wants to be my quarterback. And I'm committed to Wiggins, who wants to play beside me in the wide receiver room.
I think what nobody is talking about, I think what Brent Pry and his coaches have done such a good job of this year is getting all these guys together, putting them in a good environment where they're all friends and really tight. Now, you see it every year where recruits who were committed to a certain class, they're in group chats together, things like that. But this year's Tech class seems to have taken that to another level. So, yes, if you want to...
And taking it public.
Right, exactly. It's very public. And so if you decommit from Virginia Tech, you aren't just decommitting from Virginia Tech, you're decommitting from Gabe Williams, and good luck with that. I think Brent Pry understands what peer pressure is. And peer pressure can be a good thing if you're trying to keep a recruiting class together, right? Listen, it's part of the game these days, but it's always been part of the game. It's just more public now.
Right.
It's just more public. And I'll tell you this. I was looking at Keylen Adams' Instagram yesterday. He's deleted all his pictures from his other visits off his Instagram, except for his Virginia Tech visit.
Interesting.
So he just seems all in to me. And I will say this. These guys commit to Virginia Tech coming off a 3-8 season. They're committing for a different reason rather than just winning football games.
Oh, yeah.
If Keylen Adams wanted to commit the team that won the most games for the last year or two, he could have gone to Alabama or South Carolina or someplace like that. And, Gabe Williams would have had other options like that as well. So, I feel good. I'm not saying that every single player is going to stay committed and things like that, because the law of averages is against that. But I don't think there's going to be some wholesale. I don't think we're going to get to December and it's going to be like 4 guys decommitting in a week or something like that. I feel very good about this class staying together as a whole.
Well, now compositely, when you put all the recruiting sites together, it seems that the consensus is Virginia Tech has 3 top 10 recruits in the state of Virginia, that being Gerard Johnson being one of them, Keylen Adams being one of them, and then Chance Wiggins on a lot of sites is in the top 10 as well, with a couple of guys right on the fringe. I want to ask you about now Mekhai White, who's also a possible top 10 guy. What does this do for the wide receiver room, as far as, is there any room left for him to bring in another receiver at this point?
Tech might be done at wide receiver recruiting. I personally think that Mekhai White would have committed to Virginia Tech by now if Virginia Tech right now was planning on taking a third receiver. But they took 4 receivers last year. They signed 3 in the transfer portal, 2 of which are eligible to come back next year. You already have young receivers in the program with 3 years left, like Tucker Holloway, or even a couple of guys, the Bradshaw kid who redshirted last year. He's got 4 years left. So, and they're pretty high on him. So you've gotten to the point where a lot of times what you see programs do when they're short on players and talent at a position, they'll over-recruit it. They'll sign more players than they should. You think you should sign 2 guys this year at this position based on the numbers, but from a pure talent standpoint, you need to sign more. So you sign 4 players in the hopes. Recruiting is generally a 50-50 type thing. You sign 2 guys, probably only one of them is going to be good. But if you sign 4, then you'll probably get 2 good players out of that. So you'll see schools over-recruit a certain position, and then they'll back off. So Tech over-recruited wide receiver last year, and then you throw in the portal on top of that. And they had to. But now they've got the numbers right, and they feel like their overall talent level is better. You know, it's just like anything else. It's a numbers game at that position. So, like, I would love to take Mekhai White. Who are you going to cut to take Mekhai White, honestly?
The thing that's interesting is Mekhai White and Chance Wiggins, same high school, King George High School in King George, Virginia. And it's like, so this is a situation where it's not that he doesn't want to come, it's that Tech might not have a spot.
I mean, right now, I mean, assuming Tech signs another linebacker or two, another defensive end, a couple more offensive linemen, you're talking, and we're not even talking about the transfer portal right now. You're talking about 100 guys on scholarship next year. So you're going to have to lose 15 players in the offseason. So, or thereabouts. And so you can't, at this point, you can't be adding players unless it's at a position of need. And wide receiver is not a position of need. And I know that bothers some people because it's an in-state recruit. I wish Mekhai White was a year older because he would have been a definite take in last year's class.
Right.
100% take.
Well, there's one guy that I think all Virginia Tech fans really want to see in a Hokie uniform, the top dog in the state. And it seems like the word on the street is Tech's got a real darn good shot of landing this guy. That's Chris Cole out of Salem, Virginia, just down the road, which I find even more interesting. Salem obviously is a great high school football program, but a lot of these top dudes are coming from the 757, some coming from Northern Virginia and Nova. No, we got a guy right here, 40 minutes down the highway, down 81, up north in Salem. What are the odds Tech lands Chris Cole, in your opinion?
I think they're fairly strong. I think the Hokies feel good about it. I would not guarantee it, of course. I mean, there's a lot of major schools that want Chris Cole, and he's going to do his due diligence and take a lot of visits, and he already has taken a lot of visits. But I know that, you know, Virginia Tech's in his top 8 or whatever right now. They're going to be in his top 5. They're going to be in his top 3. They're going to be in his top 2, most likely. The question is whether they're going to be in his top 1 at the end of the process. They were the first school to recruit him. Okay, so in junior day last year for a basketball game, a bunch of recruits were in town. I think maybe even Keylen Adams was at that junior day. But you look up there, and there's Pry sitting with the recruits, and he's sitting next to Chris Cole the whole game. This was when Chris Cole was unranked. If you paid close attention to Tech recruiting, you knew who he was, but the national sites and stuff did not know who he was. He had not started picking up these offers from Alabama and Georgia and Tennessee and Notre Dame yet. He was just some unranked, maybe 3-star guy from Southwest Virginia. Nobody else was paying him any attention. Virginia Tech has been paying him close attention before anybody else has. And that's, Pry has said, Virginia Tech should always have more information on in-state products, on in-state recruits, on in-state prospects than any other school. So theoretically, yes, Virginia Tech should be able to get in there on in-state recruits before anybody else does. Virginia Tech got in there before anybody else on Keylen Adams. All right, now, it was a previous staff, but still, Virginia Tech has been recruiting Keylen Adams since he was 14 years old. Daryl Tapp originally extended the offer to Keylen Adams. Right. So that early familiarity helps. Even if there's like a coaching change, like you saw, the early familiarity with the school, you get in there and you take early visits and you like the vibe of the school. I mean, Chris Cole's visited Virginia Tech 10 times. 10 times.
One official.
But 10. Correct, but you're only allowed one official. Right. I don't think he's visited anybody else more than 3, and most people just 1 or 2.
Helps that he lives 30 minutes away.
Correct, but it's the familiarity level, and generally speaking, you know, people stay in their comfort zone. Right, I would say. So, like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to go off to like Vegas and place a bet on it or anything like that. But,
give us a percentage. Because 247 says 35% he's coming to Tech. Let me see.
Oh, on 3 dozen percentages.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, they had Keylen Adams at like 12%, and then when it looked like he was coming to Virginia Tech, all of a sudden it jumped up to 95% in like one day. Right? So, I mean, I think there's... I guess... If I had my own casino, you don't set it up like this, but I feel like there's a better than 50% chance that Tech gets Chris Cole. Now, since he's considering 6, 7, 8 different schools, like if you're a casino, you don't set up your bets like that, I don't think. But I would say, like, if there was a bet in Vegas and I really wanted to turn a profit and I wanted to take a bit of a risk, it would be like Chris Cole Virginia Tech versus the field for Chris Cole. That'd be great value on Virginia Tech, placing a bet on Virginia Tech, I think. Yeah. Okay.
Last one for you here, Chris, before we kind of wrap things up. Kind of a two-parter. Is Tech football recruiting back? Like, that seems to be the vibe. You're very much so in the mix in the top 10 in the state once again. It almost feels like it's back to its old ways, and you're competing against the defending national champs in Georgia, in Alabama. You're in the conversation for some really highly touted guys. You have some 4-stars already committed as well. And the other thing is the whole Twitter thing. It's something I've never seen before. Is it too much? Are they going overboard where they're telling guys, all right, take a deep breath?
Tech Twitter is it's always up and down, right? I remember there was a point where there was somebody who was influential on in-state recruiting. He got on Twitter and said, Coach Fuente hasn't been recruiting my area hard enough. He hasn't been recruiting me hard enough for my players and things like that. I know a lot of details about that situation. And Tech Twitter saw that and, of course, went after Fuente. That hurt Virginia Tech in recruiting big time. Like, that hurt Virginia Tech in recruiting more than anything else, and it was its own fan base, because all that stuff that guy was saying was wrong, but it's something you cannot get out there and fight back against. You can't
feed it.
You know, but the fan base did. So the fan base really hurt Virginia Tech recruiting there. They didn't know they were doing it, but they really harmed Virginia Tech recruiting, and that's one of the reasons Tech faced a talent deficit this past week. There were certain things involved in that situation that can't really be talked about and that Fuente couldn't really do anything about. And the fan base bought into everything that guy was saying, and it hurt the program's recruiting efforts. It's the opposite now that everything's going well. So the idea is to get the momentum going in the right way and keep it going in the right way. Because social media is these kids' it's the first thing they do in the morning. Probably they look at their phone and check their notifications and everything like that. So I think it's important to keep it going in the right direction. And I do think I'm excited about Tech recruiting right now, because I do think this staff, if they can do this after a 3-8 season, what could they do after like an 8-4 season or something when they actually have positive on-field momentum?
Right.
I think I know it's Tech's best recruiting staff since at least 2010, which was the last year Kavanaugh was on staff as a full-time coach. I actually think it's probably their best recruiting staff since 2005.
Wow.
And that's when it was after 2005 that they took Steinspring out of Virginia Beach so he could focus more on his offensive coordinator duties. They put Newsom in Virginia Beach instead. And then guys like Kevin Rogers left and Danny Pearman left, although he wasn't a great recruiter. But I feel like peak Tech hasn't been like top level recruiting as far as I can go up and down the staff and look at this coach and that coach and this coach and say, yeah, really good recruiter, et cetera. I think it might be their best staff since 2005, but certainly since 2010. I think that shows up in the recruiting rankings, because if it wasn't a good recruiting staff, you don't just go out and sign, top 10 players like this coming off a 3-8 season.
Well, you brought up something interesting there, and I do want to piggyback off it briefly because I think it's worth touching on. How much pressure is there to now deliver this year? Because it almost feels like, okay, you've said that, you got to have belief without evidence here, and you have to trust in that we're building something. We're getting back to what we once were. And that when you read all these articles, that seems to be the pitch, obviously. And Brent Pry, very, very good at doing that, selling the family, selling what Virginia Tech once was and wanting to get back there. But how many years can you go 3-8 and until they say, well, now you're not, there's nothing to sell. So how much pressure is there to now at least go to a bowl game this year in order to have positive momentum for the 2025 class?
It's certainly important to show progress. I look at Virginia Tech. They won 3 games last year, but They didn't get to play UVA, and they almost always beat UVA. So I think chances are they would have been a 4-8 team last year. So you're looking for improvement from 4-8, basically. So yeah, a 2-game improvement to 6 wins when you've improved your talent level, which they certainly have, I don't think is unreasonable. And I think it would show progress for the fans and everything like that. And it would validate everything that they're telling recruits. Like, we need in-state kids to get back to where we were, and we are going to win games once the talent level gets back up, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if they go out there and win 3 or 4 games again, and then people start wondering if you're Jeff Collins, right? A really, really good recruiter, but a guy who's just going to win 3 or 4 games every year, which is what happened with Jeff Collins at Georgia Tech. Yeah. That dude was a great recruiter. Georgia Tech's never recruited like that before, at least as long as I've been paying attention. But man, they were horrible on the field.
And now he's gone.
And now he's gone. And it's amazing. Like, as soon as he left, they started winning football games. So it is crazy.
With their interim head coach.
Crazy how that works. Yeah. So yes, it is a big year. Not only for recruiting purposes to keep that momentum going, but confidence of the fan base. Like, there's no, it's a great feeling to be good at recruiting, which Tech is right now, but you don't want to lose so many games where, like, you don't even enjoy the recruiting aspect of it anymore. You're like, well, another 4-star recruit, what does that matter? We're only winning 4 games a year, right? You know, you never want to get to that point.
Right.
So yes, very important that you take a step forward this year. And I think they have a chance to do that.
Awesome. Chris, thanks so much for your time, as always.
Appreciate it.
Will, thanks so much behind the scenes. That goes ahead and wraps up our show today. Again, one more time, Eric Mensah, going to be a Hokie, as well as Keylen Adams, 2 big dogs in the 2024 recruiting class. For Chris Coleman, I'm Giovanni Heater. We'll see you next time. This was episode 301 of the Tech Sideline Podcast.